So what ends up happening is the Estates General pretty much collapses, and the Third Estate is so ticked off, they decide, we're not even going to be a part of this mess anymore, and they go off and form what they declare themselves to be the National Assembly. Now, keep in mind, this is without the king's permission. They just say, we're the National Assembly. We represent the nation of France. And so we're no longer the Third Estate. We don't have a label. We don't have a number. And you know what, clergy and nobility? We would like for you to join us. And there are a few of the clergy and nobility that are like, hey, you know what? I don't like my number anyway. It's not my lucky number. We'll just give them up and we'll go join this National Assembly. But then there are other clergy and nobility that are holding back either because they don't want to or like the Marquis de Lafayette, who was just waiting for the king's permission. So now you've got this National Assembly, and then the First Estate, the Second Estate, the people who aren't there are like, well, what do we do? So once again, confusion is reigning at this meeting of the Estates General. Now, Louis has to respond in the stupidest way possible. Instead of being decisive, keep in mind, Louis XIV, if somebody had tried this nonsense, he would have put a stop to this right then. But Louis XVI, 3 days later, the delegates get to their chamber where they'd been meeting, and it's got a lock on it. They've been locked out. This thing is closed. Louis saying, you better swerve. But he won't just come out and say it. So, they're sitting there and they're thinking, well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go somewhere else. We'll show him, and they go to a tennis court, what we call a tennis court, what may or may not have been quite the same thing, if you want to get all technical, but they go to a place where tennis or a sport like it was played, and they swear an oath. And the oath that they're going to swear is that they are not going to adjourn until they have given France a constitution. Whoa. Did somebody just say constitution? Yes, keep in mind that France was an absolute monarchy. There was no constitution. So the National Assembly's deciding, look, at this point, we are going to adopt a constitution for France that is going to organize our government and set limits to the king's power. And here is Jacques Louis David's depiction of the tennis court oath. Keep in mind, he wasn't snapping a picture or anything like that. David is imagining this. And if you look here, if you kind of listen, what do you hear? Maybe I can imagine a DJ or something. It's kind of got the atmosphere of a dance party, like everybody's like, whoa, sort of thing here. And then, if you look here, people are raising their hands, they're swearing an oath, and there is a focal point at the front of this painting where you see these three people dressed differently, and they have their arms around each other. They are joining together. These three people represent the three estates, the clergy, the nobility, and everyone else. So this painting here is kind of a French memory of what this was. Now, I imagine this was probably a little more dignified and quiet than what we've got, here, that it looks like, hey, we're having a dance party or something like that. But keep in mind that the French have kind of a chaotic memory of their revolution. Whereas if you contrast this to the Declaration of Independence, everybody's all dignified. We're Americans. We're such dignified people, and our revolution was really, classy, like the Ron Burgundy of revolutions or something like that. Stay classy, America. This was probably a little less dignified than it's portrayed. And then this French tennis court oath was probably a little bit more dignified than it was portrayed. So Louis is kind of like, fine, whatever. He doesn't really see a way out of this, or at least a way that he can decisively put this down. And so Louis recognizes the National Assembly as the lawmaking body, and he says, First, Second Estate, go and join them. Now, while with one side of his mouth, Louis saying, hey, everybody go to the National Assembly, that's the new lawmaking body, out of the other side of his mouth, he's saying, hey, bring some troops over here. We might need them. Now, this is the worst possible decision Louis could have made, because on one hand, if you are going to bring troops, you better be ready to use them. When I was taking concealed carry training, the instructor said, never pull out your firearm unless you are ready to use it. So keep that in mind. You're not just going to pull a gun out in the parking lot and like, hey, I might use this, I might not. With an army, same thing. Don't bring an army out unless you plan to use it. So if you're going to bring the army to Versailles, don't have them just sitting there. Disperse this meeting. But Louis is not decisive enough to do that. Louis instead has these guys camped out. Well, what's the National Assembly thinking? Well, this is intended to be used on us. So it is contributing to the distrust between Louis and these delegates of what's now the National Assembly. Meanwhile, in Paris, if you take a look here, we've got kind of like when you're looking at a pool of water and something drips into it and it spreads out. So what's going on at Versailles is going to start making waves throughout France. So you're going to see this ripple effect here. And in Paris, they find out what is going on there, that the army is at Versailles, and they look at the Bastille, which had been a symbol of tyranny in France before the time of the French Revolution. This is from back in the Middle Ages, and some prisoners were kept here. Not a lot of prisoners, and most of the people there deserved to be there. I think there were less than 20 prisoners in the whole place, one of them being the Marquis De Sade, who was crazy and a pervert. He wrote all kinds of really scandalous stuff, and they were like, we need to put this guy away. Good decision. Well, speaking of this crazy guy, the Marquis de Sade, the people of Paris are kind of going along their business, and they're kind of paranoid about what's happening at Versailles. Well, the Marquis de Sade decides to shout out, according to one story, they're killing all the prisoners! And so people out there, they hear this crazy guy. They don't know he's crazy. They just hear somebody saying they're killing all the prisoners in here. All 15 of them, all of whom really deserve to be there. The French imagined that there were a bunch of political prisoners in the Bastille. That really wasn't the case. These were, various criminals and perverts and people like that. But it's enough to get things going. And on July 14th, 1789, this urban mob gets together and storms the Bastille. So 1789 is a year to remember, but also July 14th, not July 4th, just put a 1 in front of it. And there you have the day. If we had to put a day on the French Revolution, this is Bastille Day, which is still a holiday on the French calendar, when this mob goes to the Bastille, storms the place, finds the commander, cuts his head off, and puts the guy's head on a pole and starts just kind of walking around with it like, ooh, look, that sort of thing. That's Bastille Day. So that's what's happening in Paris. Well, the rippling is going on and even reverberating through the countryside, where there is a grain shortage. So on top of everything else, there have been some bad harvests. Everything's really going wrong at the same time, which is the reason why this French Revolution gets as crazy as it does. But there was a grain shortage. Well, why is there a grain shortage? Could it be an aristocratic plot? The aristocrats like, hey, let's starve the people in the countryside. That would be fun. What a splendid idea, she says. And this causes what's known as the Great Fear, which is a massive peasant revolt in the French countryside. And it's like, oops, yeah, the aristocrats weren't really serious about that. In fact, they didn't even say that. It's just something people were thinking and imagining. And what happens here is this National Assembly decides that they have to respond. And they respond with the decrees of August 4th, which abolished the quote-unquote feudal system. Now, feudalism, keep in mind, is a term applied backwards by historians to talk about this form of government society from the Middle Ages, where nobles got special privileges. So the National Assembly abolishes several of these privileges for nobles, including feudal dues, taxes that peasants had to pay to nobles. Also abolished nobles' special hunting rights. There were animals that could not be killed by somebody who was not noble. Also, if a nobleman was chasing a fox or something through your property, if the fox runs onto your property, the noble had the right to go there and just chase the fox. Even if he goes through your crops and ruins them, you did not have any property rights because the nobleman's privilege to hunt trumped that. And also gets rid of tax exemptions for the nobility. So with these decrees, the National Assembly says, look, we've abolished feudalism, whatever that was, and y'all can stop rioting now. In the next segment, we'll talk about the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen and the role of liberalism in these early stages of the French Revolution. So stay tuned for that. If you want to move on, go ahead and click there, or else, until next time.